as someone who has spent many years working with LGBT people, newcomers, as well as those who have been born here, unlike me, who was not born here, we have worked with many LGBT people from very many different countries. And while for the most part, certainly in the last 15 years, our experience has been working with those who come to Canada either as to make a refugee claim or looking for asylum, or those that come in as permanent residents, having been sponsored either by governments or by private sponsorship. So even though that has been the focus of our work, in fact, we have faced many settlement issues relating to the people who have been through using our services. Just a few thoughts around what the experience of people is in their home countries. And clearly in many countries we know that sexual orientation activity is criminalized, and therefore most people live their lives highly, highly constrained. And there's that notion of they're constantly unsafe, concerned that they will be found out. So some live extremely closeted lives in order to be safe, and others, in fact, continue to work for human rights issues in their own country, and oftentimes that is what leads them to a place where they need to claim asylum in order to be safe. It's also important to recognize in the countries that these people come from that there isn't just one kind of legislation, that there's also a diversity in the legislation that impacts the lives of people who come. As is true with societal attitudes, they change from country to country and place to place. So we're not dealing with one uniform experience that people come with, and that's important for people who are settlement workers to keep in mind, that there is a total diversity within the people that we are there to assist and support and provide services to. I'm just going to give you a few things here. South Africa, its constitution recognizes gay marriage. However, there's a practice of corrective rape for lesbians. We know that there's been changes recently in the Russian legislation and Russian courts. India recently went backwards and has outlawed homosexuality. And we know about Uganda, which has had a lot of publicity. One of the issues in South Korea is that there's mandatory military service. So someone who is trans is required to M to F, still required to do their military service unless they're willing to be acknowledged admitted to psychiatric hospital. So your choice is do military service or be labeled as mentally ill. Ecuador, while South America these days is not seen as refugee producing for LGBT people, we know from folks that we have seen and talked to that in Ecuador there are curative clinics established so that they can correct people's sexual orientation or gender identity. I'm going to share with you briefly a poem that was written by one of our participants. He shared the experience of how oftentimes he would have the experience of friends calling and telling him that there was a cop car parked outside of his place, and then they would have to escape from the back door in order to be safe. And he had the experience of his relatives actually being the ones to call the police on him. And this is what he wrote. It was the vigilante groups, it was the villagers, it was the uncles, it was the entire system. It was the guy I was working for who would scream in front of clients, "Can do, fag." It was everywhere. It was in the buses, it was in the taxis, it was in the bars, it was everywhere. It's like a game you enjoy while you are hidden, but once you come into the picture, once you come into the mainstream, you're bringing yourself to the attention for violence. Here's the clicker. Here we go. So while there are many grounds for people to make refugee claims under the Geneva Convention, one of the things that's important to recognize is that making a claim as a result of your sexual orientation or your gender identity has some very unique aspects to it, because this persecution is actually an attack on the individual, on their identity, on who they are. And they're stigmatized, they're seen as deviant. And so it's not like people who are escaping from contexts of war. It's a much more personal, cut to the quick, cut to the core kind of attack. And the sources of persecution are many. And the common denominator, of course, is that they are not able to get state protection. Tanaz, in the video earlier, mentioned the expectations about coming to Canada. And coming to Canada, many people, newcomers, whether they come as refugees or in other categories, believe that they are coming to a country where they will be safe, where they will be free, where their rights will be respected. However, in Canada, those experiences are always colored by intersections. So the experience may be different for somebody who's a trans man, a trans woman, somebody who is a person of color, many people who come in as refugees who end up being very poor. And there's the other issue of mental health, which we talk about trauma and how it impacts refugees, and because of the lives that they've lived. One of the important things, however, is to think there's a difference between mental illness and someone who is struggling with as a result of trauma. So we include this under mental health. However, their response is totally normal to the experiences that they've lived. So it's important to be able to distinguish between those realities. So now I want to talk a little bit about settlement and integration. And one of the very first things that a person faces when they are a newcomer to Canada is housing. Where am I going to live? I remember myself coming back from Chile with my partner, and my big question was, where will I sleep the first night I get off the plane? So this is a very common, it's a necessary, it's a human need. So I'm just going to talk about two people that we have provided supports to. One is Miriam. Names are changed, of course. So she came thinking that this was a very safe place to be. She was living in a shelter, and she actually talked to the worker who was there and asked, she was trans, M to F, and asked if it was safe for her to walk out in the streets dressed as a woman, using makeup. And the worker reassured her, absolutely, there's no problem here. You'll be able to do that, and you'll be perfectly safe. Well, that's not exactly what happened. Shelter was in the area of Granville Street, and on her first time out, she was assaulted, attacked, and called a fag. She went back to the shelter, obviously traumatized, and sharing this experience with the settlement worker who was there. And the settlement worker said, well, let's call the police. Remember, this person has come from a country where the police, in fact, are the agents of persecution. And so calling the police in a situation like this is not necessarily the first thing on a person's mind. Another experience of one of the folks that we have worked with. His name is Adam. He's also identifies as trans, F to M. And he presented as male, his name was male. The only thing that wasn't male was the sex indicator on his documents. Guess what? His documents said he was female. He was provided with shelter in a women's house. The amount of trauma that provided, not only for him, but for other women in the house who in fact were also escaping from experiences of violence, and now were confronted with this experience. And so housing becomes something that can be very complicated for individuals. And so it's really important for service providers to actually consider the safety of the neighborhood that they're going to present to newcomers in terms of where might be a good place for them to look for. And it's important to have those open and honest conversations about that. It's also important to be aware that people who come in as newcomers are frequently are vulnerable to domestic violence. And this often is the case with newcomers who come in and who have been sponsored by a same-sex partner who then exerts power and control over them. And there is the question always, especially with those who are poor and who have to share housing, there is the challenge of exploitation by roommates and landlords. And so it's really important for settlement workers to be aware of these issues and to actually have those kinds of conversations with the person to help them to actually recognize that, yes, Canada is safe. Yes, we have laws that protect us. Yes, we can go to the police. However, life on the street isn't always like that. And so it's important that the person be well prepared in order to be able to make good choices and good decisions. Work is the next area of concern for many people, needing to get jobs. Another story, Sarah, who came into Canada. She came in as a sponsored refugee, so she arrived as a permanent resident. She had a social insurance number, and she was very happy because now she was going to be legal and she was going to be able to work legally. She went to work, and her co-workers wanted to know how she had come to Canada. And so she said, I'm a refugee. And so the co-worker said, well, how can you be a refugee? You come from such and such country. There's no war in that country. And so she was faced with the dilemma of, do I out myself? Do I find a way to put the questioning person off? So again, a conversation that can become much more complicated for people who arrive as newcomers and who face work. The reality is that many of the people that come in as newcomers end up having to take jobs to survive. And those jobs are in environments where there has not necessarily been the kind of sensitivity and awareness development that we hope happens in every workplace. And so she said, I'm proud to be a refugee. I have worked with, and I continue to work with folks who say, I don't want to say I'm a refugee, because they're conscious of the amount of stigma that can go in our society, especially these days when Canada is not seen as the most welcoming country for refugees. Our reputation of being welcoming is somewhat tarnished. At least I believe it's very tarnished. So again, it's important for settlement workers to have open and honest conversations about some of the challenges of the workplace that a person might face, and to help them to understand, to help them prepare for interviews so that they're able to answer the questions. in a way that they feel comfortable. And of course, advocacy in terms of workplace, in terms of everything, is really important for settlement workers to engage in. And then another area that's really important is social connections. So there's work, there's housing, there's work, but there's also that need to have a sense of belonging, a need to be connected to people. And the question is, who has to take the risk? Is it the newcomer who has to take the risk of outing themselves, of identifying their gender, of making that connection? And so what we know is that many individuals, not all, but many experience that their co-national communities are hostile to them. Many of them are afraid that there's somebody in their community that knows their family back home and are going to then communicate to their family back home. And so their co-national community is not necessarily a source of social connection. And our LGBT communities are also somewhat exclusionary, tend to be white, well-educated, middle class, and not necessarily have room for people who are different within our own LGBT communities. What happened? What happened? Okay. However, having said that, we find allies in unexpected places. We have found a group of straight men from Uganda who have been extremely helpful and supportive in terms of helping refugee claimants who have come from Nigeria, who've come from Nigeria, who don't have their documentation, their identity, end up in detention because of that identity. And these Nigerian men have been very helpful in terms of expediting ways in which they can get their identification. And so the settlement worker has a role to play in each of those areas: housing, work, and social connectedness. And it's really important for the settlement worker to listen, to hear, to be able to pick up on the nuances and not to make the assumptions that are so easily made. And finally, with respect to referrals, it's always important to be careful in terms of what referrals are being made and to where and what the connections are. And it is the responsibility of the settlement worker to make sure that you have researched these referrals. And then the question is, there are those of us who've been working in this field for the last 15 years and beyond, and then there's the not-for-profit sector. And there's a total imbalance. All of us who work in the grassroots organizations are volunteers. Our time is limited, our possibilities are limited. We're asked to do many, many things in terms of providing training and education, which we're very happy to do. However, we also have those limitations, and there is a clear power imbalance between the grassroots organizations and the not-for-profit sector. So in terms of collaboration, we really are happy to be involved in collaboration. However, we expect that those who do have funding, that are funded, can at least respect the limitations that we have as volunteers. And just, this is the International Lesbian Gay Association map that they put out every year, and the darker colors indicate the countries where there's the death penalty and where there are serious imprisonment or torture explanations. So thank you for listening, and good luck. I hope that you're able to. It's a lot of work and a lot of information, and a lot of responsibility. So all I can do is to encourage you, make mistakes. It's fine to make mistakes, so long as you figure out how to say sorry and how to correct them. Thank you.